Hey, welcome to Audio listeners. We're all about breaking down the best ideas from great books.
Want to learn from all those amazing books out there, but you just can't find the time?
That's exactly what we do. We pull the key ideas from the best books on growth and motivation.
So you can boost your personal growth, gain powerful knowledge, and find that daily motivation for free.
Here's the cool part. Every book is a complete playlist, so you can learn from start to finish.
So go check out the playlist section. You're going to find something that helps for sure.
And hey, if you like what we're doing, do us a favor and hit that like button.
You're not going to want to miss what's next, so make sure you subscribe for the latest books.
And one last thing, what book should we cover next? Let us know right down in the comments.
All right, let's jump right into one of the most talked about personal finance books of all time, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now, this book isn't some get-rich-quick scheme. It's really about a massive shift in how you think, and it challenges pretty much everything we're traditionally taught about money.
And this quote, "This is the entire book in one sentence." It sounds so simple, right? But this one idea is the key that opens up a totally different financial world. It's a complete flip of how most of us are wired to think, and we're about to break down exactly what it means.
So the book's main lesson is told through this amazing story of the two major father figures in Kiyosaki's childhood. Each one had a completely different philosophy about money, and as you can guess, it led them to two very, very different outcomes in life.
Now check out this contrast. On one side, you have his poor dad, his actual father, who was a brilliant, highly educated man. He followed the standard advice: get a good job, work for a paycheck. But his mindset was all about limits. I can't afford it was a statement, it was a full stop. Then you have his rich dad, his best friend's father. He barely finished the 8th grade, but he had a PhD in financial smarts. His mindset was about possibility. How can I afford it wasn't a statement, it was a question. It was a challenge that forced his brain to find solutions.
So, what happens when you follow Poor Dad's advice? Well, Kiyosaki says it leads you straight into this trap, a trap he famously named the rat race.
You know the feeling of the rat race, right? It's like being on a hamster wheel. You work harder, you get a raise, but then your expenses just magically seem to grow right along with your income. You're running faster and faster, but you're not actually getting anywhere new.
And here's the cycle laid out perfectly. Step 1, you get a job. Step 2, you get that paycheck. But then, poof, a huge chunk goes to taxes and bills. With whatever's left, maybe you buy some nice things, a new car, a bigger TV. But those things are liabilities. They often create more expenses. And before you know it, you need more money. So you're right back at the beginning, trying to get a raise or a promotion just to keep up. It's a loop.
Okay, so if that's the trap, how do you escape? Rich Dad's whole philosophy starts with one single, incredibly powerful lesson that just flips the entire game on its head. It really all boils down to this one question. What is the one thing the rich understand that most people just don't?
And there it is. This is the big secret. Instead of trading their precious time for a paycheck, their energy is focused somewhere else entirely. They aren't just trying to climb a corporate ladder for a bigger salary, they're playing a totally different sport.
And this is the other half of that secret. If they don't work for money, what do? They build systems. They create things that make money for them. Their goal is to have income streams that flow in whether they get out of bed in the morning or not. Their money becomes their hardest working employee.
Okay, so that sounds great in theory, but how do you actually do it? How do you make money work for you? Well, it comes down to a really practical strategy. The whole focus shifts to one thing and one thing only: building up your asset column.
Now this might be the most important concept in the whole book. Forget the complicated definitions you hear from bankers. Kiyosaki makes it dead simple. An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket, period. A liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket. The rich spend their lives acquiring assets. The poor and middle class, we spend our money acquiring liabilities that we think are assets, like a fancy car or even the house we live in.
So, what counts as a true asset? We're talking about things like businesses that can run without you being there 24/7, stocks, bonds, things like that, real estate that actually pays you rent every month, even royalties from a book or a song. It's anything that generates a stream of income. The ultimate goal is to build up this portfolio of assets until the money they make covers all your expenses. Once you hit that point, you're free. You've officially escaped the rat race.
So let's bring it all together. What does all of this really mean for your financial future? It means you have to fundamentally change what you're paying attention to.
And this is the final, most important takeaway. A huge salary is not going to make you wealthy if you just spend it all on liabilities. Real wealth isn't built from your paycheck. It's built by taking money from your paycheck and turning it into assets. Assets that then go on to make more money for you. It's about building your own money machine.
So the question to leave you with is this. When you think about your money, what is your main focus? Are you just thinking about getting that next paycheck and paying the bills? Or are you actively, intentionally, and consistently building your asset column? Because the answer to that question could truly change everything for you.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving headfirst into Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now this is a book that completely flips conventional wisdom about money on its head. So get ready, because you might just end up questioning everything you thought you knew about wealth.
So at the very heart of this story, you've got these two father figures. On one hand, you have a highly educated academic, and on the other, a high school dropout. Now you probably think you know exactly who's going to end up rich and who ends up poor, right? Well, think again.
See, this isn't just some story about who has more degrees on their wall. Nope. This is about a clash of two incredibly powerful financial philosophies, and the consequences, they are absolutely life-altering.
And what's so interesting is that both of these guys were successful in their careers, you know? They both earned really good money, but their financial destinies ended up being worlds apart. One of them became one of the richest men in all of Hawaii. The other? He left behind a pile of unpaid bills.
So let's start with the first father, the one everyone calls Poor Dad. This is the highly educated one, and he believed that the love of money is the root of all evil. He genuinely saw wealth as this corrupting thing, a really dangerous temptation.
But then you have the other father, Rich Dad, the one who never even finished 8th grade, and he saw things completely differently. For him, it wasn't the love of money, no, it was the lack of money that was the real root of evil. That was the source of all the stress and suffering in the world.
So right there you have this huge clash of philosophies, and it led to two totally different playbooks for how to live your life. I mean, each one had its own set of rules for what success even looks like.
Poor Dad's advice is probably the one we've all heard a million times, right? Study hard, get good grades, and go find a safe, secure job. It's that traditional path of the employee, basically becoming a cog in the machine. But Rich Dad's advice? Whoa, it was a total game changer. He said, study hard so you can find a good company to buy. It's just a simple twist of a single word, but that little change represents this massive shift in thinking, from employee to owner, from being a passive participant to an active creator.
And this difference in mindset went deep. For Poor Dad, family was, well, it was kind of an obstacle, a financial burden. He'd actually say things like, "The reason I'm not rich is because I have you kids."
Rich Dad, though, he was the exact opposite. He saw his family as his biggest motivation. He would declare, "The reason I must be rich is because I have you kids." See, for him, family wasn't a liability at all. It was his legacy.
I mean, their worldviews were just a study in contrasts. Let's take your home, for example. Poor Dad always said it's your greatest asset. But Rich Dad, he saw it as a liability. Why? Because it's constantly taking money out of your pocket, mortgages, taxes, upkeep, without putting any income in. And what about risk? Poor Dad's advice was simple. Avoid it. Play it safe. Rich Dad said no. You learn to manage risk. They were just on completely opposite sides of the financial universe.
So, what was the real, fundamental difference between these two guys? It wasn't their diplomas, it wasn't their paychecks, it was their mindset. You could almost think of it as the software that was running in their brains whenever they thought about money.
And Rich Dad boiled this entire difference down into one single really powerful question. He'd ask, what's the difference between being broke and being poor? And his answer was just so profound. He said, broke is temporary, poor is eternal. Think about that. Being broke is just a circumstance, right? It's a temporary cash flow problem you can solve. But being poor, that's a mindset. It's like a self-imposed life sentence.
And he really saw that poor mindset as a kind of mental laziness. It's this habit of just giving up before you even try, of basically letting your brain go to sleep whenever the topic of finances comes up. And here is the absolute perfect example of that. Saying, "I can't afford it," well, that's just a statement of defeat. It's a mental roadblock. Your brain just shuts down. But asking, "How can I afford it?" now that's a question. It sparks creativity, it forces your brain to start working, and it opens up a whole world of possibility.
It's such a simple shift in language, but it's literally the difference between a closed door and an open one. The first one lets you off the hook. The second one forces you to think. It's like a workout for your financial brain, and hey, the more you use it, the stronger it's going to get.
So with these two incredibly powerful but totally conflicting mentors in his life, the author found himself at a huge crossroads. He had a big choice to make, a path to choose.
And can you believe it? At just 9 years old, he made his choice. He decided he was going to follow the unconventional wisdom of his rich dad. He wanted to learn the secrets of the rich.
Yeah, he chose that road less traveled. He picked the path of financial literacy and entrepreneurship over that well-worn trail of just getting a secure job. And, just like Robert Frost wrote in his famous poem, that has made all the difference.
So, what's the ultimate lesson here? It's not just about positive thinking. The real key is financial education. I mean, money itself can come and go, but knowledge, that's real power. When you truly understand how money works, you can finally make it work for you.
And that really brings us to a final question for you. Most of our financial education starts right at home, from the people who raise us. So take a second and think about it. Whose voice is in your head when it comes to money? Is it the voice of rich dad, or is it the voice of poor dad?
All right, today we are diving into a fantastic story about building wealth. And it all starts with a couple of 9-year-old kids, a huge pile of old toothpaste tubes, and one single lesson that would completely change how they saw the world. And it all comes down to one really powerful idea. This is it. This is the core idea that drives the entire story. It sounds so simple, right? But actually getting it, well, that's the key to a totally different way of thinking about your finances. And for the little kid in our story, this lesson definitely didn't start in a classroom. You know, the whole journey kicked off with one of those moments of childhood rejection that just really stings and sticks with you. And it was that feeling of being left out that sparked the one question that changed his entire life. So every big life change really begins with a powerful why, doesn't it? For the 9-year-old boy we're talking about, that why came from a pretty simple and pretty painful moment of being told he just wasn't good enough. See, he and his best friend Mike, they were the poor kids in their school. So one day, after watching his friends drive off to their beach house in a brand new Cadillac, he just went home and asked his father that simple but huge question. And this was his dad's advice. You know, it was well-meaning, for sure, but it was also basically him saying, I don't have the answer. So with nothing more to go on than that, the two boys decided, okay, let's use our heads, we'll figure this out ourselves. With that mission to use their heads, the boys came up with a plan that was, well, let's just say it was creative. This was their first business venture, and it was also very, very illegal. So they formed a partnership, and they started collecting their raw material, which at the time was used toothpaste tubes. They were actually made of lead back then. They had this whole stockpile growing in a cardboard box right next to the washing machine, which you can imagine his mom just loved, all while telling everyone, nope, can't tell you, it's a business secret. And check out this production line. For a couple of kids, this was actually pretty clever. They were melting the lead tubes down, pouring the hot liquid metal into these plaster molds they'd made from old milk cartons, and then just waiting for their product to cool. So, what exactly were they making? They were making lead nickels. When the boy's father came home, he found two kids just covered in white plaster dust, so proud that they had figured out how to literally make money. And then he had to very gently explain what the word counterfeiting means. But here's what's so interesting. His father's reaction. Instead of getting angry, he actually praised them for their creativity and their initiative. He told them that most people just talk and dream, but they had actually done something. And that encouragement, that became the real lesson from their little failed business. And that encouragement really leads to the next big pivot in the story. When the boy asks his dad again how to get rich, his dad finally just admits that he doesn't know. And then he points him toward a totally different kind of mentor, Mike's dad. So this is where we start to see these two completely opposite worldviews. On one side, you have his highly educated, poor dad, who really valued job security, but had to admit he didn't know how to build wealth. And on the other, you have Mike's dad, the soon-to-be rich dad, a guy with no college degree who was quietly building a business empire. So the boys set up a meeting with Mike's dad. They're probably hoping for some secret formula or some big words of wisdom. What they got instead was, well, something they did not see coming.
Rich Dad was super blunt. He was like, look, I'll teach you, but we're not doing this in a classroom. You work for me, and I'll teach you as you go. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. And then he gave them just 10 seconds to decide. It was a test right from the start to see if they could spot an opportunity and act on it fast. They both said yes.
So what was this amazing life-changing job? The pay was 10 cents an hour. Even for the 1950s, that was basically nothing. The boys were totally confused, but hey, they'd already said yes. So their glamorous entry into the world of high finance was spending 3 hours every single Saturday in this hot, dusty convenience store, taking every single can off the shelves, dusting it with a feather duster, and then stacking it all back up perfectly. It was just excruciatingly boring. So after 3 long weeks of this, all our narrator had to show for all that work was 30 cents, just enough to buy a couple of comic books before he went home. He didn't feel like a student of wealth. He felt like a slave, and he was just about ready to give up. But that feeling of frustration, of being underpaid and unappreciated, that wasn't an accident. That was the entire point of the lesson. The real education was about to begin, not in spite of his anger, but because of it. So by the 4th week, he just had enough. At school lunch, he tells Mike he's done. He was tired of working for practically nothing, and he was convinced he hadn't learned a single thing from Mike's dad, who he hadn't even seen since that very first day. But instead of being disappointed, Mike just smiles. He's not surprised at all. Actually, it looked like he had been waiting for this exact moment to happen. And then comes the big twist. Mike reveals that his dad had predicted this all along. He knew the narrator would get fed up. So quitting wasn't the end of the lesson, it was the beginning of the next part of the plan. The whole thing, the terrible pay, the tedious job, that feeling of being taken advantage of, it was a deliberate setup. Rich Dad wasn't trying to teach them how to dust cans. He was engineering their very first, and maybe most important, real-world lesson about money and work. Which leaves us all with this big question, right? Why would you put 2 little kids through that? What could you possibly learn from feeling like a slave for 10 cents an hour? Well, it turns out the answer is the very first rule for building wealth. Today, we're diving into a really powerful story. It's about a 9-year-old boy's first job and the totally shocking lessons that completely flipped his view on work and money. And it all kicks off with a feeling I bet a lot of us know all too well. I mean, really think about it. You're working hard, you're giving it your all, but the reward just doesn't seem to match the effort. For the young boy in our story, this feeling wasn't just some vague idea. Nope, it was a cold, hard number. Get this, 10 cents an hour. For 3 hours of dusting canned goods every single Saturday, he was making just 30 cents. Now, after a few weeks of this, he was completely fed up and ready to quit. And that's where the real story begins. So let's get into the details of this frustrating first job and see exactly what pushed our young hero to his breaking point. So here's the setup. Our protagonist has been working for his friend's father, who the story calls Rich Dad, for about a month. He's had to give up his baseball games, and he feels like he's learned absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, his own dad, a super-educated government employee he calls his poor dad, is furious. He's convinced his son is just being exploited. And this sounds like pretty logical advice, right? It's what most of us would probably tell our own kids. It's the standard playbook. Go in there, demand what you're worth, and if you don't get it, you walk. So armed with his father's words, the boy marches in to confront his boss. And as you can imagine, this advice sets the stage for a pretty dramatic confrontation. So the boy shows up for this meeting on a beautiful Saturday morning, only to be told he has to wait in line. He ends up sitting there for over an hour, just stewing, watching all these other people go in and out. By the time he's finally called in, his anger is just at a boiling point. And he does not hold back. He just lets it all out. The feeling of betrayal, the disrespect, the sense of pure injustice. It's a really raw emotional moment for a 9-year-old confronting an adult. But his boss's response is, well, it's not at all what he expected. Instead of getting angry, Rich Dad just calmly says that the boy's complaints sound exactly like all his other employees. Wow, this just completely disarms the kid. The big confrontation he had been building up to suddenly turns into something else entirely. And right here, this is the big turning point. Rich Dad reveals that this whole frustrating experience, the ridiculously low pay, the long wait, the anger, it wasn't neglect. It was the lesson. And this leads us to the first major philosophical idea from the story, this concept that life itself is the ultimate teacher. Rich Dad explains that real learning doesn't come from lectures. It comes from life pushing you around. That feeling of being underpaid and angry wasn't the problem. It was life pushing the boy, trying to get him to wake up and learn something incredibly important. So he then breaks it down into 3 ways people usually react to these pushes from life. 1, you can just give up and play it safe. 2, you can get angry and push back, blaming everyone else, which is exactly what the boy was doing. Or you can do what the wise and wealthy do. You learn the lesson and you move on. And this is so crucial. Rich Dad tells him, if you think I'm the problem, you have to try to change me. But if you realize that you're the problem, you can change yourself, learn something, and grow wiser. It's all about taking ownership. This huge shift in perspective leads us straight to the core financial lesson of this entire story. This is the single most important distinction. It's a fundamental difference in mindset that, according to Rich Dad, is what separates people who struggle financially from those who build real wealth. It's not about how hard you work, it's about what you're working for. I mean, these 2 philosophies couldn't be more different, right? The boy's poor dad pushed for the traditional path, get a great education to land a secure job, a path built around working for money. Rich Dad's path was all about getting an education on money itself, so that he could learn to make it work for him. And Rich Dad explains that most people follow that traditional path not out of passion, but out of fear, and that fear traps them in the cycle of needing a paycheck, basically becoming slaves to money, and then getting angry at their boss, which is exactly what the boy did. Okay, so after explaining all of this, the lesson isn't over, not even close. In fact, Rich Dad is about to put the boy through one last, totally unconventional test. He really wants to know if the boy is truly ready to learn this different way of thinking. Has all that anger finally turned into a real desire for knowledge? The boy, who's now starting to see the bigger picture, says yes. And then, bam, the twist. The boy came in demanding a raise from 10 cents an hour, and now he's being told his new salary is 0. Zilch. He is, as you can imagine, shocked and completely outraged all over again. This is the ultimate test. Rich Dad has completely removed the paycheck from the equation. So why would he do that? Because as long as the boy is focused on a wage, he's still thinking like an employee. He's still working for money. To truly learn this lesson, he has to think differently. The solution, Rich Dad explains, isn't in his pocket. It's between the boy's ears. The real challenge is to stop thinking about getting paid and to start looking for opportunities to create value. That is how you learn to have money work for you. And that really brings us to the final question for you. If your paycheck disappeared tomorrow, what problems would you be forced to solve? What new opportunities would you suddenly see? It's a pretty provocative thought, but it gets right to the heart of this lesson. True financial education isn't about earning a bigger salary. It's about learning to see the world beyond one.
So what if I told you that one of the most powerful lessons about money isn't taught in some fancy business school, but in a dusty old convenience store while working for free? Let's dive into this incredible story about escaping one of the biggest traps in modern life.
It all boils down to this one single idea. And it sounds kind of weird, right? The rich don't work for money. But according to our source material, if you can really, truly get your head around what this means, it could literally change your entire financial future. So what on earth is he talking about?
Well, our story starts with these 2 9-year-old kids, the narrator and his best friend Mike. They cut a deal with Mike's rich dad to work in his convenience stores. But here's the kicker. Their pay was a big, fat 0. Nothing, not a single penny.
Then you imagine, 3 whole weeks go by? That's 9 hours of their precious Saturday mornings spent working for absolutely nothing. For a kid, that's like an eternity. They're missing baseball games, they can't buy the comic books they want, and they are getting seriously fed up. They feel like they're being totally ripped off, and frankly, they are ready to walk.
But right as they're about to quit, Rich Dad sits him down and finally reveals what's really going on. See, he wasn't just being a cheapskate. He was trying to show them something. To open their eyes to a trap that he says most hardworking people fall right into without ever even knowing it's there.
And this is where the first real test begins. Rich Dad offers them a raise. He goes from 0
to 25 cents an hour. Now, the narrator says he tried to play it cool, but inside his heart just started hammering. I mean, for a 9-year-old, that sounded like real money. But Rich Dad is just getting started. He grins and he ups the ante. Okay, fine. $1 an hour. $1? At this point, the narrator's brain is just screaming, "Take it, take it!" You can just feel the temptation, right? The internal battle must have been absolutely raging.
Then he does it again. $2 an hour. You have to remember, this is 1956 we're talking about. $2 an hour for a kid? He would have been the richest kid in the entire world. He's already imagining a new bike, a fancy baseball glove, the whole shebang. But somehow, he keeps his mouth shut. He's passing the test.
And finally, Rich Dad throws out a number that is just completely absurd. $5 an hour. And right then, in that moment, something inside the narrator just clicks. The offer is so over the top, so ridiculous, that the desire, the temptation, it just vanishes. And this wave of calm just washes over him. That little voice in his head, screaming for the money, finally went quiet.
So let me ask you, what would you do? At what point would you have caved? $1? $2? $5? Rich Dad knew that every single person has a price. By resisting that temptation, the boys proved they were ready for the real lesson.
And this is the trap he was talking about all along. The rat race. You know the drill. Get up, go to work, pay the bills, and then do it all over again. It's this endless, exhausting loop that's powered by two of our most basic emotions. The fear of not having enough money gets you out of bed, and the desire for nice things keeps you spending every dime you make.
He uses this great metaphor. It's like a donkey chasing a carrot on a stick. That job, that paycheck, that potential raise, it's all just a carrot dangling right in front of you. It keeps you moving, it keeps you working hard, but you're not actually getting anywhere. You're just chasing an illusion, day after day.
This slide just lays it out so perfectly. On the left, you've got the trap. It's a purely emotional reaction. You feel fear, so you work. You get paid, you feel desire, so you spend. It's automatic. But look at the right. That's the escape. It starts with the same feeling, fear. But instead of just reacting, you stop. You think. You ask yourself, wait a minute, is this job really the best long-term solution to this problem?
Let's really break these two emotions down. First up, fear. We're talking about the fear of not being able to pay your rent, of being poor. It's that pit in your stomach that keeps you up at night. So you go to work hoping that a paycheck will make that feeling go away. But it never really does it?
And then, the second that money hits your bank account, a whole new emotion takes over. Desire. Or greed, if you want to call it that. You start picturing all the cool stuff you can buy. The new car, the bigger house, the fancy vacation. And that feels good. But that joy is temporary. And pretty soon you need more money for more joy. And the cycle just keeps on spinning.
So what's pouring gasoline on this emotional fire? Well, according to Rich Dad, it's plain old ignorance, a lack of financial education. When you don't actually understand how money works, how to make it work for you, you just become a puppet, and fear and desire are pulling the strings.
And please, don't make the mistake of thinking that just having a lot of money is the answer. It's not. So many rich people are driven by the exact same fears. They just hoard money, hoping it'll make the fear go away, but it actually makes it worse. Now they're not afraid of being poor. They're terrified of losing all their money. They're still stuck in the trap. It's just a fancier, more expensive cage.
This right here, this is one of the biggest takeaways from the entire story. A job is a short-term solution. Most of us use it to solve an immediate problem, which is paying this month's bills. We almost never stop to think about the long-term problem, which is how to build real wealth and become financially free.
Okay, so how do you actually begin to escape? It all starts with mastering your own mind. You have to be honest with yourself about the fear and the desire you feel. But you can't let those feelings drive the car. The key is to see them, to observe them, and then to use your thinking brain to consciously choose your actions instead of just letting your emotions run the show. And let's be really clear here. The goal isn't to be lazy or to never work another day in your life. The goal is to make a massive shift in your mindset, from working for money to learning how to have your money work for you. That right there is the real path to freedom.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all, the one Rich Dad really wanted those two little boys and all of us to ask ourselves. When it comes to your career, your bills, your financial life, who's really in charge? Is it your logical, thinking mind, or is it the gut-level pull of fear and desire? The answer to that question could be the very key that unlocks the cage.
Today, we're going to dive into a really powerful story. It's about two young boys who wanted to get rich. But instead of just getting a job, their mentor gave them a lesson that would totally change how they saw money forever. And believe it or not, it all started with a pile of old comic books. This quote right here, this is the heart of the whole story. It's the advice those two boys got, and it kind of suggests that when we're only looking for a paycheck, we might actually be blind to the real opportunities to build wealth. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? So, if it's not about money and security, then what's it all about? That is the exact question these boys had to figure out. And the answer is hiding inside this amazing real-life lesson. So let's dig in. Okay, so picture this. Two friends go to a rich dad mentor and ask him to teach them how to make money. His first assignment for them is, well, it's pretty weird. They have to go work at his convenience store every single Saturday for zero pay. Nothing. And you know what? They actually agreed to it. But as you can imagine, after a few weeks of doing all this hard work and not seeing a single dime, they started getting really frustrated. They felt like they were getting ripped off and they were just about to quit. But that's exactly when things got interesting. See, by taking away the paycheck, their mentor was forcing them to stop thinking like employees. They had to open their eyes and look for value somewhere else. And after all that frustration, one of them finally saw something that everybody else was missing. The first Saturday, it was just boring, unpaid work. The second Saturday, same thing. But by that third Saturday, with no money to even buy a comic book for himself, the protagonist's focus shifted from his empty pockets to what was happening around him. And that's when he saw it. He was just kind of watching the comic book stand, probably wishing he could afford one, when he saw this store manager, Mrs. Martin, doing something that made absolutely no sense. She was taking all the old, unsold comics off the shelf. He watched her take a pair of scissors, and she started cutting the top half of each comic book's cover right off. Then she just tossed the rest of the comic, the entire book, into a cardboard box, just threw it away like it was trash. So she wasn't just tossing them, she was carefully keeping just the top part of the covers. And that little detail, that was everything. That was the light bulb moment. He just had to know what was going on. Well, when he asked her, she explained that she just sends the covers back to the comic book distributor for a refund. To the store and the distributor, the rest of the comic book was literally garbage. But to the kids in the neighborhood, man, those comics were treasure. The boys had just found their golden opportunity. They had this huge realization. Something one person sees as worthless could be incredibly valuable to someone else. They weren't looking at a box of trash anymore. They were looking at an asset. And right then and there, they started putting together a plan for their very first business. So they went straight to the distributor and asked him, hey, can we have those comics you're throwing away? And he agreed. But there was one condition, one really important rule. They were not allowed to resell them. Now that rule could have stopped them, but instead it just forced them to be even more creative. Their solution was absolutely brilliant. Instead of selling the comics, they started a library. They got all their inventory for free, right? They cleaned out a spare room in the basement. Then they charged other kids 10 cents to come in and read as many comics as they wanted for 2 hours straight. It was an amazing deal for their customers and a genius business model for them. And just look at these numbers, because this is incredible. Their cost for their main product, the comics, $0. They were averaging about $9.50 a week in revenue. They even hired their friend's younger sister to be the librarian and paid her $1 a week. And they were still making a profit. They literally created a money-making machine out of garbage. So the comic book library was a huge success for 3 months. But the business itself, the money they made, that wasn't the real lesson here. The real takeaway was the fundamental shift in how they thought about making money. And this is the key to everything. While the librarian was running the show, the boys could be somewhere else, doing something else. The system they built was earning money for them, whether they were there or not. They weren't just working for money anymore. They had figured out how to make money work for them. You know, this experience really showed them the huge difference between two mindsets. On one side, you've got the employee mindset, which is all about trading your time for a paycheck, but they ended up with the owner mindset. Find an opportunity nobody else sees, create a system around it, and then let that system generate income for you. So when they went back and told their rich dad mentor about their successful business, he wasn't even interested in how much profit they were making. He was just thrilled because they had finally, truly understood the first and most important lesson about building wealth. And here it is, summed up perfectly. Not getting paid wasn't a punishment, it was a tool. It forced them off that typical path of just earning a wage and pushed them onto a creative path of building something. It unlocked their ability to see what everyone else was missing. So what did they really gain from all this? They gained the understanding of what an asset is. Their little comic book library was their very first asset. It was a system that put money in their pocket, completely independent of their time. That was the real paycheck they earned. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. This story isn't really just about comic books. It's about a way of seeing the world. It asks all of us to look around our own lives and wonder, what valuable opportunities, what free comic books are being tossed out like trash right in front of us, just waiting for someone to see them differently?